Welcome, everyone. So, I am continuing the series called The Energetics of Trauma. This is video 2, where I'm going to discuss flight. And so, I will share that even though I'm calling this the energetics of trauma, these are survival mechanisms and defense mechanisms that we all enact, whether or not that we are traumatized. For example, you watching this video right now or even listening to it may be a form of flight because uh, it may be a form of distraction, which I'll get into a little bit more, but um, that is a mild form of flight, we might say. It's just that when we experience trauma, it is either the sudden um, experience of flight, basically that flight instinct really kicks in and we desire to flee or we actually flee. In mild forms of flight that can be more energetic or spiritual, we may be fleeing the present moment or fleeing our lives, fleeing our bodies. All of those are incredibly common. And a lot of those have to do with conditioning and the stress levels of the world rather than trauma. So, throughout this series, today I'm going to be talking about flight, but I'm going to be talking about fight, flight, freeze, and then I'm going to be talking about fawn, flaccid, and attachment states. And so, what's important to know as a starting point is that fight and flight are sympathetic nervous system reactions. And what does this mean? We have a sympathetic nervous system. We also have a parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system, I always remembered it when I was in school, is rest and digest. It is intended to slow us down, to get our system to relax. As we'll discuss in freeze states as well as fawn and flaccid states, is that sometimes we can go into a stuck place with the parasympathetic nervous system or a freeze state rather than a state where our system is simply recuperating and getting a break and sort of carrying out all the tasks that it needs to get us to our best health, best state of wellness, best state of releasing stress, feeling stress-free, feeling unburdened. So that will be upcoming, but fight and flight are sympathetic. And what that means is that our sympathetic nervous system wants to do something. It wants to take action. It seeks motion. And so with flight, we can have a basic understanding of it as that we wish to escape something, a situation, a person. We want to run away. And so that's the most definite, basic definition for flight, is that we are in a situation or interacting with a person that we wish to flee. And it's important to understand a few things when we go into the nuances of this. Some of us may be hearing that message loud and clear from our bodies. This person is no good, this relationship or friendship is no good, this situation, there is something really wrong here, you need to leave. However, some people are not, quite a few people are not in touch enough with their instincts, which is how flight comes through, how all of our instincts come through fight, flight, freeze. How they all come through to us is this instinctual sense in our bodies. So it's going to be a felt sense in our bodies. And so many of us have fled, I'll get into that in a moment, the body, to the extent that we cannot clearly hear our instincts. We cannot clearly understand when our body gets to an agitated state, that it is telling us that something frightening is going on, that something dangerous is going on, and that we should leave. There's an interesting book, and it's, open to everyone. There are some books that I read that are more hardcore, but this is very much a kind of commonplace, beginner intermediate book, called The Gift of Fear. And I believe he was a police officer or something in that realm. And he worked with women who experienced violence, in many cases, sexual violence. And all of those women had the instinct, sort of the hair standing up on the back of their neck, the understanding that something was wrong and a desire to flee, to leave. And they unfortunately did not listen to that instinct. And so when I'm saying such things, I am in no way creating any pattern of blame or responsibility on on the women in that book. What I am sharing, though, is that we can have such a divide between our bodies and ourselves, what we are encultured to believe is polite or nice, and listening to the messages of our bodies, listening to the messages of our instincts. This happens all the time with women, where we are taught to just ignore ourselves, to be nice, because there is a lot of fear out there about what will happen if we are not nice or kind. The response is a lot of times not worth the stress of not sublimating our our own desires, and that is something that a lot of women need to get out of. But overall, no matter who we are, if we grew up in a household where we were brought up in this sort of conditioned response to um, always be kind, always have manners, that we are going to put that first ahead of our own instincts, telling us that this person, this situation is dangerous and we need to flee. So, in trauma, what often happens is that we either repress the instinct to flee, or we are incapable of fleeing. For example, picture somebody in an abusive relationship with children. They know they have kind of woken up from the fog and they know that the relationship is no good, but they don't have any place to go. They don't have the finances to get there. They don't have of all of the things in line that they would need to survive on their own, especially if they are providing for children. And so what happens is that they repress this flight instinct. And what happens when we repress our flight instinct is that it turns into stress and agitation in our bodies. In Yiddish, we call this spilkes, and it essentially means that sort of felt sense of ants in your pants, that sense of that there's nothing quite right, that your body can't quite fully calm down because your body, your nervous system, your very survival instincts are telling you to flee, but you are not able or capable or willing to either listen to that, or the survival instinct to purely get through our lives is stronger than the survival instinct to flee. So our nervous system must weigh the options. For example, in that case where I was talking about, in which somebody is in an abusive relationship with children, if they were to flee that situation, they may not survive. They may be homeless or on the streets, or, starve, all of those sorts of things. That survival mechanism, that survival instinct will be more dominant than the flight one, but the flight one will still be present there, telling them that something needs to change, that they need to leave, they need to go. I will say that even in relationships where there is no abuse, there is no trauma happening, it's just that people grow apart and relationships and friendships sometimes end. This is on the milder scale of things, but I talk with people all of the time who have an understanding that the relationship is over, but they have processed that in some cases mentally, in some cases not fully mentally, but they are ignoring the instincts of their bodies telling them to leave, to break off the relationship, to essentially enact that flight pattern, to take that action. And so, what happens to people who have that sense that the relationship or friendship is over on the milder scale of flight? Well, they might flee to another person and start cheating. They might start ignoring their partner, paying attention to their phone or the TV, or their video games more than their partner. Um, they may also just find excuses to not be at home. So, taking extra hours at work, going out to the bar or going out other places that are not at home. We can see in these mild to moderate cases that the flight instinct has kicked in, that instinctual response that is telling them to leave that situation, leave that partner or that friendship. In the cases of friendship, it can also be canceled plans, all those plans that are like, let's go out to coffee or tea, and that never manifest. There is a small dose of flight going on there because otherwise you would get together with the person. You would have healthy attachment with them. You would be relationship building instead of surface level, texts or messages without ever that action taking in place. In some way, you are fleeing that relationship. A different way to look at the flight instinct is not only to understand it as a survival mechanism. We do, at the base level of our being, we do anything that we can do to survive. And so flight is one of the mechanisms that we do um, to experience that survival, to get us through the minute, the hour, the day, the lifetime, whatever we need to do. Another way of thinking about flight is as creating distance between yourself and another person. And if we think about it in that way, we could think about all of the ways in our days that we are engaged with the flight mechanism to get through our workday, to get through relationships, either that have run their course or because we have experienced trauma, we may have trouble with vulnerability and attaching securely to people, basically allowing for people in without pushing them away. We may have wounds of abandonment, rejection, low self-esteem that all cause for us to push people away or keep people at what we believe is a safe distance. And this is because often we have experienced the wounds of um, trauma, especially early childhood trauma, that has told us that people are not safe. We should push them away. If we let people in, they will only harm us. If we reveal our vulnerabilities, they will be used against us. They will be mocked. They will not be honored and cherished by the people around us. As I talk about in my book, Shadow Work for the Soul, where I also go over these mechanisms, um, we experience flight for a reason. And what can happen in our early childhoods is that we sort of build the building blocks, both neurologically, so our nervous system, as well as our beliefs and understandings about reality, based in our childhood home as well as kind of early schooling. And so an interesting thing, if we look at fight and flight, the sympathetic responses, is that they don't really start to be built up or kicked in until about age 10 or 12. And so what that means essentially is that people who experience significant early childhood trauma are likely to go into freeze states. But we do have those responses of flight still available to us in early childhood. We just aren't able to utilize them, and they don't really grow in strength until we sort of get to the age of early teenagerdom. And so, but in early childhood, we may have experienced this sort of betrayals or conditional love or household filled with trauma. Um, all of us to be able to feel safe in the world, to feel safe interacting with people, developing relationships with people of depth, require unconditional love. That is love experienced as a child, a feeling of specialness, a feeling of being honored, a feeling of being loved for exactly who we are. We do not need to do anything or be anyone in particular to receive love. If we experience that in our early childhoods, we are unlikely to be in this flight state or flight state dominantly in terms of our relationships as we grow older. Put more simply, we are able to develop healthy relationships easily to let people in, to show who we are authentically. I will also mention beyond early childhood trauma that causes for us to engage in a flight pattern where we seek to push people away because we have learned that people are dangerous, is that we also live in a very flight-oriented culture. I will talk about this in a moment, but kind of the grind culture, the always doing something culture, um, that very much is a flight culture. And so we very much live in a flight dominant world where either we are intended to do something or we flee ourselves and our suffering, which is the spiritual dynamics of this, which I'll get into in a moment. I will mention a few more things about flight, in particular to the trauma aspect of things. One of, as I mentioned, flight is an instinct, an intuition, and if we follow it, we take action, we leave. And so somebody who is dominantly in flight, because we all are going to be dominantly in one of the survival mechanisms, fight, flight, or freeze. And the basic answer to that is like, which of these videos resonates with you the most? Or what do you do when you experience stress? Do you leave physically? Do you, start scrolling your phone? Do you book a vacation? The type of personality who is a flight type of personality is going to be the type of person who at the first sign of conflict leaves or ghosts. They're going to be the person that needs to get up from the family dinner table and go take a walk, goes to take a walk. They're going to be the type of person that is always moving. On a Saturday, they not only have 2 things booked, they have 5 things booked. They are always moving. They're the person that, if they're able to, travels many different places. And travel is wonderful, but as I will get into in a moment, there is a question of if somebody is fleeing themselves by by traveling, by doing whatever they are doing. Are they fleeing themselves? Are they fleeing the present moment? Um, Sort of thing. So one more thing about the trauma aspect of this, which is, you know, especially early childhood trauma, is that flight requires action, in particular, moving, running away, creating that distance between ourselves and whatever is perceived as dangerous. So, a person, a situation. When we were in our early childhoods, we may have had this flight instinct kick in, but we were not able to follow through. Picture an infant in diapers who wants to kick, but is unable to because there are traumatic circumstances going on. Picture a young child who wants to run around, but they are told by their parents that they will be punished if they do so. And so that child sits even though every instinct in their body is telling them to run around to essentially enact their own version of flight. Now picture the teenager who is going through that period where they are experiencing the first sort of blossomings of individuation. But they're sort of torn. They're torn between still wanting to be a child and a part of their family, a part of groups, versus trying to figure out who they are as an individual. And so that teenager is likely to have many instincts of flight. And that is totally and completely normal. You know, if we look at kids running away from home, that is flight. There's some reason that that mechanism in themselves is causing for them to run away. And it will either be something that they're wishing to flee within themselves or actually trying to flee the family home for some reason. But flight instructs us to flee, to walk, to run, to move away. And this is, if you take anything from this video, this is one of the missing key pieces in trauma healing that does not get acknowledged and will leave somebody with incomplete healing of their experiences in life, be they mildly to severely traumatic. And that is that when we experience that flight instinct, and for whatever reason, we are not able to leave to create that safe distance, that energy gets stuck within our nervous system. In particular, it gets stuck in our legs. Dominantly, but it gets because our legs move us, they carry us, we can run, flee, kick, all of those things that our flight instinct is wanting for us to do to get out of an unsafe situation. And so we may have experienced one trauma or many in which we have stopped ourselves from fleeing. And so that flight instinct in our nervous system gets locked in as energy that hasn't been potentiated, basically energy that has not found expression yet. And so what does this mean? It means that in some cases, finding somebody that works with the body. I could go into a whole thought about somatic therapies these days because they're becoming popular, but somebody may not have proper training in them to understand things of depth, which is always unfortunate when things become popular. Um, but there are spiritual healers and body workers who are well aware of this flight instinct For example, I studied craniosacral therapy, and it was typical in those sessions for the body to seek expression, to essentially express these old experiences of flight in order to be able to release them from the system. So in sessions like that, the legs may kick, the person may move and twist around. There may even be kind of a motion of running a bit. Um, all of those things, when they are able to express themselves, are released from the nervous system and allow for the nervous system to move from a flight state, locked in a flight state, into a state that is more restful, less agitated as a whole. Another way that people can work with this is, doing, kicking motions on their bed if it feels right to obviously be safe in your surroundings. Or there are plenty of people that I have instructed to start going for walks, or if you're a runner, to run, but specifically setting the intention beforehand to engage with the flight instinct that is latent in the body so that it can finally find that expression. And in expressing itself, it can release, and the system can be a little bit less burdened. Another way to go about this, which is wonderful, is my body Deva work. And so somebody can go into their legs, go into their body, ask where the flight instinct is locked in, where it has not been expressed, to feel into that body, to ask the body what it needs to express that flight instinct, and then to go do it. Because our bodies, in a simple manner, may just want to walk or run or kick or something like that. But our inner child, our inner 6-year-old may want to walk and get a piece of candy that they couldn't, at that age or something like that. And by doing body Deva work, you can listen to the answers that are specific to when that energy was locked in to those inner children, and to do the activity, to do the form of flight that they would enjoy, that would allow for them to feel seen, heard, and also allow for them to express this energy through some form of activity, thereby releasing it from the nervous system. So let's talk about the other aspect of this, which is that we typically think of flight as, if we think about it at all, is flight away from something. Again, keeping that distance between ourselves and others. But the other thing that isn't talked about very often and really should be, to understand flight on a deep level, is that flight can also be used to flee from ourselves, to flee the present moment, to flee our bodies, to flee our suffering that we are experiencing. So one of the ways, dominant ways that we experience flight is by looking at our phones, by watching YouTube, by distracting ourselves from the present moment, from our bodies, from what we are feeling in the here and now. And so there can always be a question on whatever we are doing, even if we think that it is wonderful. For example, over the last week, I've gotten into discussions with people about spirituality, as I always do, but specifically spirituality and the flight mechanism. Is reading, is participating in spiritual seminars, workshops, seeking gurus, um, looking for enlightenment or awakening, healing, all of that sort of stuff. Is that in some way enriching to yourself, allowing for you to be more present, be more alive? Or is that something that is engaging with the flight instinct? Is that causing for you to move away from your body, move away from your life, to um, flee to the heavens because the earth is too difficult. We are so attracted to spiritualities that allow for us to deny our suffering, that cause for us to move away from our suffering, that give us tidy explanations, a sense of order and control. And what they are doing is letting us move away from all of those dark shadows within ourselves, sitting with chaos, sitting with our darkness, sitting with our swampy places within, sitting with um, the experiences of suffering, of emotions that we carry within our bodies that are wounding our souls. Because if we are looking for any form of truly embodied awakening, it is going to be in visiting those places of suffering and sitting with them instead of denying them through another spirituality that offers us um, a sense of organization and control and certainty. Um, yeah. So, major way that people flee themselves is through spirituality. It is also through all the distraction methods that I talked about. It is also on a kind of more severe end of the continuum. We flee ourselves continually through our addictions. So, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, all of those, are causing for us to shift our consciousness to a place where we are separating from ourselves. And I will put in a special thought here that, again, I think that some utilization of plant medicines, ayahuasca, all of those experiences can allow for people to move far away from their suffering, where we tend to be really locked into our suffering, to gain perspective. And that perspective can be life-changing. If you are seeing something from the top down rather than being stuck in it, those are vastly different perspectives. And that perspective can not only be life-changing, but it can shift energy. It can shift the experience and expression of suffering that somebody is experiencing. But again, it is a question of discernment, because there can be a question of, if somebody is using psychedelics, if somebody is using plant spirit medicines to gain that perspective, to get to a place where they become more grounded, more themselves, more awakened within their human bodies, or if they are doing it as an escape hatch, a way to flee their body and their lives. And so these are all questions that all of us, especially on a spiritual path, need to ask ourselves. And the same thing I would say is for, I work with a lot of people that smoke weed, and that marijuana can offer an expansion, a rapid cycling of energy. But there is a tipping point in which marijuana can also be utilized to cause for somebody to flee their bodies, flee uncomfortable emotions, flee their lives. And so, another addiction that is very predominant, that we can either classify as an addiction or it can go to the milder side of things, um, are eating disorders. And so in severity, eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, that sort of thing, are all about flight. In some cases, they are flight and freeze and those sort of things too. But we can start to notice how through food we seek to flee our emotions, to create safe distance between ourselves and our emotions, to flee the present moment, to flee our suffering. On the milder scale of this, I will share that, whenever I get stressed out, whenever I've worked a long day, I want heavy foods. And in some cases, there is no issue with that. Sometimes the work that I do spiritual healing for a living along with teaching, and both of those require a lot of energy in a lot of different ways. And so there was a questioning process that I went through of, um, am I eating this because I have done the energetic equivalent of a marathon, or am I eating this after a ritual, after work with people, after teaching? Because in some way I am uncomfortable with the amount of energetic flow going through my body. Any of us who have engaged with ritual work, with healing work, with channeling, with any sort of meditation, any sort of experience in which we have experienced enhanced flow through our bodies, know that first of all, it brings things that are difficult in our lives from the background to the foreground. So past traumas, past experiences, past emotions locked in our systems, our body begins releasing those. What will also come to the foreground are areas of our lives that we need to pay attention to, what is off balance in our lives. But on an existential level, when you strip all of that stuff away, somebody can get to a point where their body, their energy system starts to experience more energy flow going through it. And we fear that energy flow. We fear having more life force flow through us. And so we can suppress this in a variety of ways. For example, it is completely normal for people who are experiencing spiritual awakening to lapse into all sorts of addictions in a way, and partially because of painful emotions coming up. That is kind of the dominant thing, but also because um, if they were to face things, they would need to contend with the energy flows arising and with having more energy in their system overall. And that can be a scary thing for people because we are used to being devitalized. We're not used to having flow or consciousness flow through our systems. And so um, this can be a question that spans everybody from somebody on the first step of their path suddenly wondering like, oh, why do I want to eat this sugar? Why do I want to eat this sweet? Why do I want to eat this whatever I'm eating? Is it because my body is simply craving this as a way to introduce a bit of sweetness into my life? Or is it because there is some sort of flight pattern engaged? Those of us further on our spiritual path, that question is still present there. Am I utilizing food? Am I utilizing some form of addiction to flee myself, to flee the present moment, to flee painful emotions and suffering? And then people who have worked considerably on themselves and no longer fear their emotions, are willing to face them, start to have the question or awareness of what activities and behaviors they're doing to flee energy flow, to flee life force, pure awareness emerging from their systems. So I hope you found this talk interesting and fruitful for you. I will be continuing this series on the energetics of trauma. And I will reveal one last thing, which is that the purpose of understanding and healing past responses of flight in our system or any of these survival instincts is so that we can get to a place of healthy responsiveness in our system. So what does that mean? That means that even if we have healed every single bit of flight in our system, even if we are flight dominant, That means that that is going to be our go-to whenever we feel stressed, whenever we feel fearful, is that we are going to engage in flight. That the purpose of healing or resolving the past energetics of flight in our system is simply so our bodies, our nervous systems, our spirit, our soul is not locked into that flight pattern and continually carrying it out in the present day. It is so that our bodies understand that these flight mechanisms are in the past and can release them. And so we can come into a place of healthy responsiveness. And that state of healthy responsiveness means that if we get an instinct to flee in the present moment based on present day circumstances, that we are able to listen to it in an adult state of consciousness and to carry that out the best way that we can in the present moment. So just like all of our emotions, we are intended to have them. We're intended to experience all of them. It's just about if we are willing to face them and allow for them to flow through us instead of feeling afraid of them, resistant to them, blocking them. Same thing for our survival and trauma instincts, is that we should experience flight. If someone scary comes into our present day, that flight instinct comes in, we should have the capacity to run. If we sense danger in our circumstances, we should be able to walk away. That friendship, that relationship that needs to end, we can recognize our behavior of being like, you know what, it was a good friendship, but we're different people now, and let's not like fool ourselves by, continually talking about plans that will never happen, or let's actually engage with some sort of flight plan so that we can leave this relationship or partnership or work situation that is no longer working for us. Like with anything within ourselves, when we acknowledge it, when we allow for it to come forward, we can take an active role and pair that with our conscious awareness to make the best decisions for ourselves in our lives.